Hello there guys, and welcome back to my channel. It's Kidbomman here. Some of you might recognise me already, and also some of you new faces. And welcome to my channel, by the way. And I thank you ever so much to support me and help my channel grow. Okay, so as you know, I have done reading 4 parts of Tinkerbell and Friends, based on Disney fairies. So on this video, we will continue to read Tinkerbell and Friends on page 88. Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed that reading with me. So I know it's quite hard, but I took so much time to read it to you guys, and I can do my best if I can. Okay, so let's carry on reading to you guys. There were the lampshades made from our old colanders. Even the chair she was sitting on was special. The back of it was made from a serving platter. The seat was the frying pan, and the legs were made from our old serving spoons. At one point or another, Tink had repaired the frying pan, the platter, and each of her spoons. Some she had repaired more than once, but eventually pans and spoons were wore out, although Tink thought anything broken could be fixed. The kitchen talent fairies didn't always agree. Sometimes they run out pots and platters away. Tink felt a special connection with every pot and pan she had ever fixed. She couldn't bear to see any of them on a scrap metal heap. So when the kitchen talent fairies had thrown a pan, the platter and the spoons, she had rescued them and brought them back to her workshop. With a lot of thought and a few pinches of fairy dust, she turned them into a chair. Tink thought about the frying pan chair as she closed the door to her room and threw back down for the home tree. What a wonderful challenge it had been to make it. Not liking fixing Vestal's silly rusted home, there was no challenge at all in that. Suddenly, Tink stopped in her tracks. "That's it," she said aloud. "That is what's bothering me. No challenge." Tink was one of the best pots and pans talent fairies, or in all of Pixie Hollow. Her joy came from fixing things. She liked a challenging problem more than almost everything. But for weeks now, every job Tink had been given had been easy as an apple pie. No pots that wouldn't boil water. No colanders that refused to drain. No pans that were more holes than pan. Just fix this little hole. Fix that little hole. Boring, boring, boring. But at least now I know what's wrong. Tink thought, what do I need is a problem to solve, a big one. Tink, a voice behind her interrupted her thoughts. Tink turned. Her good friend Ranny, a walking talent fairy, was hurrying towards her. Being the only fairy without wings, Ranny could not fly, so Tink gently landed on the moss carpet in a home tree's hallway. She waited until Ranny caught up. "Where are you going?" Ranny asked. "I was just on my way back to the workshop," Tink replied. "Why do you ask?" said Ranny. She had a habit of finishing everyone's sentences. "No big reason. I just thought maybe we could play a game of." But Ranny never got to finish. At a moment, she was interrupted by the tremendous crash Both fairies heard branches crackling and snapping near the tree of the top of home tree. In the next distant instant, there was a third that shook the tree to its very roots. Tink and Ranny nearly lost their balance. From a nearby tea room came the sound of dishes falling and shattering. There was silence. Tink and Ranny stared at each other. Did the moon just fall out of the sky? Ranny whispered in the oh. Maybe it was a branch falling from another tree, said Tink. But even as she spoke, she knew that wasn't it. The sound had been made but by something very heavy and solid, and it landed quite close by. The two fairies listened carefully. After a long moment, Tink took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. I've got to go and see. What is it? What it is? If you say no. So, said Ranny. She dabbed her forehead with a leaf kerchief and attempted to smile bravely. Then they thought they were both nervous. It was a lot easier to see it on Ranny. She was a most watery of all water talent fairies. At the moment, her forehead was beaded with sweat. The two fairies headed back towards the front entrance of her home tree. Tink walked so that she wouldn't get too far ahead of Ranny. Brave as she was, even Tink didn't want to go outside alone. Together, they hurried past the tea room, down the corridor, through the entrance hall, and out of a knothole door. When Tink stepped into the sunlight and she stopped cold and gasped, Ranny, who was right on Tink's heels, crashed into her. Ranny peeked over Tink's shoulder. She gasped too. What is that? She whispered. Right in the front of them was a huge, menacing-looking black bull. It was taller than two fairies put together and just as wide. And it had landed right in the middle of the home tree's courtyard. A large crack ran through the courtyard where it had smashed down. Several toadstool chairs had been damaged or squished completely. The ground around the bull was covered with splintered remains of branches and twigs. Tink mind reeled. The courtyard was a very special place for her fairies. Many of the most important meetings and celebrations were held there. Not to mention the fairies had to fly through it to reach the home tree's knothole door. Whenever Tink saw a courtyard, she felt that she was home. It always seemed to say, "Welcome. The home tree waits to embrace you." Now, the sight of a damaged courtyard made her heart ache. The large crowd of fairies had gathered around the bull. Clarion, the green fairy, stepped forward. "Is everyone all right?" she asked. Her voice was tense with worry. "Is anyone hurt?" Noses and wings were quietly counted. Amid a buzz of concern. Incredibly, every fairy in the home tree had escaped harm. The Queen sighed with relief. She looked around the crowd. Terence, Spring, Jerem, Rosita, Luna, she asked. she said. Her voice had regained its normal vocal tone. The fairies and sparrow men sprang to attention. Fairy, fly to the top of the tree and see what damage has been done. Please report back at once. With Terence, the fairy dust talent sparrow man. Indeed, the group took off. When they had gone, a scarily talent fairy tiptoed up to the great bull. She raised her hand as if to touch his rough surface, but at the last second, she pulled her hand back. Do you think it might be alive? She whispered. At once, the very nearest to a bull hopped back of a couple of steps. What is it made of? Asked Dulcie. A bacon talent fairy? The fairies around her shook their heads, muttering, Don't know. Maybe it's a big rock, said Angus, a pots and pans talent sparrow man. Though I've certainly never seen a rock this round before. Maybe it's a giant black pearl, said Ranny. Though I have never seen a pearl this big. Tink shook her head. No, she said. It might be shiny, if it were a pearl. Dulcie flew hesitantly up to it. She gave it a small rap with her knuckles. Ow, she said. It's hard. She blew on her hand. And it's hot, she added. Tink did not like to stand around, and she had stood around long enough. Bravely, she marched up to the bull and gave it a good hard smack. It's iron, she said. She shook her hand to cut it off from a hot metal. Good old-fashioned never iron. Several fairies frowned. Iron is really heavy, Dulcie said worriedly. It's going to be hard to move, said Ranny. She started to cry. We should try to find out where it came from. The Queen told them that might help us figure out how to get rid of it. Her suggestion was greeted with enthusiasm. Let's take a good look at it, said Ranny. She wiped the tears from her eyes. All the fairies all moved in closer. They circled the bull. Some fairies flew around the top. Others bent down low to look at the part that touched the ground. Hold on, Saint Tink. She hovered, like a hummingbird, near the very top of a bull. I see something. Other fairies flew over to join her. You're right, said Lily, a guardian talent fairy. It's some kind of a mark. Angus nodded. It's almost like a hook. Tink shouted in triumph. It's a mark that looks like a hook. And you know what that means? Captain Hook! Cried several fairies. Of course. Why did I realise it before? It's a cannonball, Tink declared. Tink had seen plenty of cannonballs back in the days when she had spent all her time with Peter Pan. But she had never before seen a cannonball in Pixie Hollow. Hook and his pirates never came to this part of Neverland's forest, and the fairies tried to avoid the pirates as much as they could. Just then, they heard the muffled boom from the direction of Pirate's Cove. Several fairies jumped. Cannon fire, said Queen Carrion. Captain Hook must be after Peter Pan again. The fairies knew what she meant. On Neverland, there was an on and off between Hook and his pirates and Peter and the Lost Boys. Uncertain, quiet nights when the wind was just right. The fairies could hear Pan and Hook's swords clashing in the distance. Said Tink with a worried little frown. Peter Pan was a friend of Tink's, though she rarely saw him anymore. She knew him better than any of the fairies did. She didn't like to think of Captain Hook firing cannonballs at Peter, but Peter is too quick and too clever to get hit by a cannonball, Tink assured herself. There was another muffled boom, followed by the whistling sound. "Everyone duck," said the Queen. All fairies dashed for cover in the roots of a hollow home tree. Something flew from the air high over their heads. It landed in the nearby forest with a tremendous thud. "The fairy circle!" she cried. Dulcie, she hurried out from behind the roots. What if it landed here? "What about the mother dove?" Granny said, almost in a whisper. "What if it hit her hawthorn tree?" The fairies looked at each other in stricken silence. Mother Dove was the closest thing to poor goodness in all of Neverland. She was a source of all fairies' magic. They had almost lost her once. When the hurricane hit Neverland, the thought of losing her again was too dreadful to bear. In a tense voice, Queen Clarion told several fast-flying fairies to fly to the top to a hawthorn and check on the mother dove. They set her off in a blur. Moments later, our fast flies were back. "Mother dove is fine," a fast-flying spirit man reported. "No one feather ruffled, and the fairy circle is undamaged." The fairy let out a collective sigh of relief. Tink glared at the big black cannonball in the courtyard. "How dare these pirates!" she exclaimed. "How could they be so careless, I say?" But before she could say more, Spring, a message talent fairy, came speeding up to her. She had a grim look on her face. "Tink," she said, "I have been to the top of a home tree. I think you'd better come with me." "Now what?" Tink wondered. "And what does it have to do with me?" "Maybe something metal has broken, and they need me to fix it," Tink mused. "But why right at this moment?" She followed the messenger into the home tree. They passed through the main corridor, where the paintings representing each different Never Fairy talent hung on the walls. Tink saw that the most of the paintings were crooked. She had even fallen to the floor. Some had even fallen to the floor. She stopped and straightened a painting of a dented stew pot, which was a symbol for the pots and pans talent. Up through the branches they went. They turned right, then left again. Finally, they came to the corridor that led to the Tink's room. Tink saw her friend Terence waiting for her. Terence had been in the group the Queen had sent to check the damage to the tree. He looked upset. Tink had said, "I hardly know how to tell you this, your bedroom." Her beloved bedroom. Tink didn't even wait for him to finish his sentence. She zoomed down the corridor to the end of a branch. When her room sat, what would she found? She wondered. Would it be a horrible mess? Would her life pan bed be overturned or even dented? It was not a pleasant thought. When she reached the tip of the branch, she stopped cold. Her room wasn't a mess. Her room wasn't there at all. Tink hovered, staring. The walls, the ceiling, and everything in the room had disappeared. All that remained was the floor, the juggled edges of the broken walls. She looked up past the hole when her scene should have been. The surrounding branches had broken twigs, but the other fairies' rooms were still there. The cannonball had hit Tink's room, and Tink's alone. Tink felt faint. She sat down cross-legged on the floor. How could my room just be gone? She thought. Where will I sleep? Where will I keep my clothes and other things? Where are my clothes and other things? More fairies began to arrive to see what here had happened. Oh, Tink, said her friend back. It's awful. I can't believe it, said Prilla. Your bed is gone. It was such a great bed. Tink stood up. She didn't want the fairies to feel sorry for her. She took a deep breath. We'll just rebuild it, she said. She sounded calmer than she felt, and it will be an even better room than before. We'll help you, said Terence. The others nodded in agreement. Suddenly, Tink felt angry. After no one would have to rebuild anything if it went for the cannonball. Her hands balled into the tiny fists, thinking about it. And in the meantime, she said, firstly, we're going to get the cannonball out of our courtyard. What do you say, fairies? Yes, they all cried. Let's do it. With Tink in the lead, the fairies went back to the courtyard. The most obvious thing was trying to push in the cannonball, Tink decided. If a lot of us get behind it and fly as we can, maybe we can pull it out of the courtyard, she said. Let's move every little twig out of its path. That way it won't get stuck on everything, said Beck. The cleaning tent fairies grabbed the brooms and swept up all those splinters. Other fairies helped by moving the pieces of the squished mushroom chairs. All right, said Tink. Let's get into push-in formation. Several fairies arranged themselves behind a ball. The strongest ones hovered close to the bottom. The weaker ones stayed near the top. 1, 2, 3, shove, shouted Tink. The fairies beat their wings madly. They heaved against the ball as hard as they could. After that moment, they stopped. Several fairies laid against the ball, panting. I think it moved a tiny bit, said Prello, who was inclined to see the best in the whole situation. It didn't move an inch, said Angus, who was not. Let's give it another try, said Tink. They rearranged themselves. Now the strongest fairy went to the top of a ball. The weaker ones went to the bottom. 1, 2, 3, shove! Tink cried again. The fairies used every ounce of strength they had. At last they stopped. Their wings were clarifying with exhaustion. Nothing, said Angus. Indeed, the ball had not moved, not a hair. Tink sighed. Well, I guess that's not going to work, she said. But this is the only beginning. As the other fairies sat down to the rest, Tink began to pace. She was sure she could came up with an idea that would work. She tugged at her fringe, thinking hard. Down the meadow near the fairy dairy barn, the faint sound of bells could be heard. Cannibal, or not cannibal, the dairy mice had to be fed. The mouse herd and tenant fairies were taking the herd out to pasture. Tink looked towards the meadow. Mice, she said suddenly. Mice? Said two of the fairies nearest to her. Yes, said Tink. Mice. It's simple. We'll harness all the dairy mice to a cannibal. Maybe together all of them can't move it. Wonderful idea, Tink, said Queen Clarion. The messenger fairies headed for the pasture to tell the mice herding fairies to round the dairy mice. Meanwhile, the kitchen tenant fairies hurried back to the kitchen to collect all the life of acorn breads they could spare. The mice adored an acorn bread. Occasionally, a mouse would get loose from a herd and be caught in the home tree pattery, nibbling bread. Now the fairies could use the bread as a lure to get the mice to the bowl. Fairies from other tenants pitched into Florian, and the rest of the weaving tenant fairies quickly fashioned ropes. From a sweet they plucked from a meadow. I wish you had time to collect marsh grass, Florian said. It makes it stronger rope, but I think it should do. It only took a few minutes for the mice herders to get the mice to the home tree. One by one, the fairies began to harness the mice to rope. Altogether, there were 36 mice. They stood into attention, their noses firing. At last, there were all information. The mouse herding fairies stood just in front of them, waving the bread. The mice squeaked excitedly at the sight and the smell of it. That's it, my little loves, said one of the mouse herders. Delicious bread. Okay, so I'll stop on page 114. Okay, so we've got pages left to finish. Then we're going to get it finished. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed reading the storybook of reading the Tinkerbell and Friends. I hope you guys appreciate it. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed listening to me when reading to you. It's so entertaining for you. I'm so glad you enjoyed my first part of reading Tinkerbell and Friends on the previous video. Okay, so I'll just take a little break for now. So we continue reading on part 6 to continue reading Tinkerbell. I hope you have already subscribed to my channel and hit the notification and don't miss out future videos. And I hope you have a good day, guys. And I'll see you short for a while.